Right. Well, it's time to kick it all off with an introduction and thinking about the scale of the problem. Incidents like this is what we'll be talking about today. Many, if not all of you, will have a personal experience of road traffic collisions, and some of you will have cared for terribly injured patients in these collisions. Some of you will have seen these patients breathing and felt their pulse. Some may even have talked to you, and then they've died, trapped in their car, or at the roadside, or on the journey to hospital, possibly in resus. You'll know what this feels like, and it's horrific. Many of us will have experienced a real disconnect, a disconnect between the timelines we worry about in hospitals, striving to minimise time to the key life-saving interventions, and the time it's taken to extricate the patient. The disconnect between the focus on movement minimisation during extrication and the low rate of spinal and unstable injury we actually end up seeing in such patients. We're all trying to do the right thing for patients, but are those long extrication times really helping, or are they actually harming our patients? It's dealing with these types of patients and the aftermath of such incidents which got us started on this journey of understanding a little bit more about extrication and wondering if improvements could be made to those incidents where there's a huge transfer of energy through a vehicle containing a relatively fragile human being and that patient is really, really sick. And in the UK, a third of our major trauma comes from incidents on the roads. Now, understanding injury requires an appreciation of biomechanics, kinematics, and individual variability. In biomechanics, we study how energy is absorbed, dissipated, or transmitted through the human body. Kinematics is the branch of mechanics that deals with the motion of objects, including vehicles and people, without reference to the forces that cause the motion. These disciplines come together in road injury where vehicle mass, velocity, and direction of impact, the vectors, determine the energy involved. The body, just like the vehicle, must absorb or redirect this energy. When the energy exceeds the body's ability to absorb it, what we might term its tissue tolerance, injury then occurs. Energy is not evenly distributed across the body, and injury is rarely uniform. Modern vehicles include a range of safety systems designed to protect occupants: seat belts, airbags, crumple zones, reinforced cabins, and advanced sensor-driven restraint systems. These devices are highly effective but have limitations. For example, seat belts may reduce fatal injuries, yet they can cause specific injuries in certain groups, such as chest wall injuries in older adults or abdominal injuries in children. The biological response to injury also varies. A young adult with a high tissue tolerance and good physiological reserve may survive a high-speed crash with relatively minor injuries, whilst an older person might sustain life-threatening injuries in a much lower energy collision. Similarly, a person with osteoporosis may suffer multiple fractures from forces that would leave others uninjured. These examples illustrate the importance of considering not only the mechanism of injury, but also the vulnerability or tissue tolerance of the individual. In post-collision care, we're often asked to interpret the scene, predict the injury, and act quickly to prevent death. For this, we must consider those three interrelated components: the kinematics of the injury, the performance of any safety systems, and the tissue tolerance of the individual. It's only by understanding all three that we can begin to predict injury patterns, prioritise interventions, and deliver time-critical treatments. Unfortunately, despite all of the improvements that we've seen in trauma care in the last 20 years, RTCs are still a really common cause of death and disability. And I'd be willing to wager that every person here has either been personally or professionally affected by the results of an RTC. Motor vehicle collisions remain one of the most significant causes of injury and death globally, responsible for approximately 1.3 million fatalities and up to 50 million injuries each year. Now, these injuries often lead to long-term physical, psychological, and economic consequences for the individuals, families, and society. In high-income settings, post-collision care systems aim to mitigate these outcomes, yet significant challenges persist, particularly in the management of patients who become trapped within their vehicle. Now, in terms of the UK statistics, the number of deaths annually sits somewhere between 1,500 and 1,900 per annum, and this has stayed pretty level, having plateaued since 2012, with the exception of a slight reduction during COVID. So that means roughly 5 deaths every single day by a pretty ruthless and indiscriminate killer. The other thing we often forget about is not just the deaths, it's the survivors who have those serious injuries and are left with ongoing disabilities. And this is a staggering 22,000 people per year, or 60 a day. When you pull that all together, there's a patient either killed or seriously injured every 22 minutes in the UK. So at least one during this talk. So anything we can do to improve outcomes in this group is definitely worth looking at. Road safety is a critical global issue impacting millions of lives each year. The World Health Organization, or WHO, and the United Nations have developed a comprehensive framework to tackle this challenge, known as the 5 Pillars for Action in Road Safety. These pillars are the backbone of a safe system approach aiming to minimise road traffic injuries and fatalities. 5 Pillars for Action in Road Safety were established as part of the United Nations Decade of Action for Road Safety between 2011 and 2020, and have continued to guide global efforts in the subsequent decade of action from 2021 up to 2030. These pillars were designed to provide a holistic approach to road safety, addressing various facets of the issue to create a robust and resilient road safety system. By focusing on safer roads, vehicles, road users, and effective post-crash response, this framework aims to build a sustainable environment where road safety is paramount. The 5th pillar, post-crash response, focuses on improving the emergency response and medical care provided to victims of road crashes. This includes efficient emergency medical services, or EMS, trauma care systems, and rehabilitation programs. The aim is to reduce the severity of injuries and improve the chances of survival and recovery for crash victims. While the 4 pillars have garnered considerable attention and resources, this post-crash response pillar often remains underemphasised. The oversight can be attributed to several different factors, including the reactive nature of post-crash measures and the focus on preventative strategies. But the importance of a robust post-crash response can't be overstated. Immediate and effective care can drastically reduce the impact of injuries and save lives. So it's time to think about the road injury chain of survival, what it is, and we're going to use this to frame where different interventions can help, and we'll predominantly focus on element 2 during this training, the early rescue. Early recognition and call for help is a timely recognition of serious injury, and activation of emergency services is the most fundamental step. In high-income countries, this has been enhanced by automatic crash notification systems which relay crash severity and GPS data to dispatch centres in real time. In low-resource settings, reliance is often on bystanders or informal networks. Delays in this recognition or calling for help, especially in rural settings, are consistently linked to poorer outcomes. And emerging tools like the Simplified Bleeding Audit Triage Trauma, or SBAT score, offer potential for empowering lay responders to recognise life-threatening trauma and initiate an appropriate response. Early rescue. So, entrapment can delay care and is associated with worse outcomes. Studies support a focus on self-extrication and rapid rescue techniques unless physical or medical factors prohibit this. Minimising time to rescue, rather than rigid immobilisation strategies, is now seen as a priority. New guidance advocates for a context-specific approach aimed at reducing rescue delays and facilitating earlier treatment. The next part of the care, early initial care. The role of bystanders or first responders in providing care before professional help arrives is increasingly recognised. Interventions such as applying pressure to bleeding wounds, opening the airway, and positioning an unconscious person correctly can be life-saving. Programs like Stop the Bleed show that lay people can be trained to deliver this care safely and effectively. And studies also highlight the importance of low-cost interventions such as intramuscular tranexamic acid or TXA to reduce the bleeding, particularly in settings where intravenous access is difficult or delayed. The fourth part of the chain, early transport. So prompt transport to hospital remains a cornerstone of trauma care. Systematic reviews confirm that shorter pre-hospital time improves survival. But in areas without formal ambulance services or challenging terrains, this link may involve improvised transport. In these sorts of settings, the potential risks of moving a patient has to be balanced against the risks of delay, especially since the incidence of spinal cord injury is lower than we once believed. And the fifth part of the chain, early hospital care and rehabilitation. So once at hospital, care includes resuscitation, surgery, and ongoing critical care. But outcomes are also shaped by how quickly care is initiated and how well services are coordinated. Integration between pre-hospital and hospital care via trauma systems like trauma networks improves outcomes. But equally, early rehabilitation planning is vital to long-term recovery, especially given the burden of disability associated with road injuries. So, what value does this framework bring? Well, beyond clinical intervention, the road injury chain of survival offers a planning and policy framework. It supports structured data collection at each stage, informing future investment and evaluation, identification of bottlenecks in emergency response systems, alignment of funding and training with greatest need, global benchmarking by enabling standardized comparisons, and this makes the chain not just a clinical tool, but a systems level instrument for improving equity and efficiency in trauma care. Okay, well, let's start with a proposition that many injuries are time dependent and that healthcare helps. Consider a head injury, chest injury, or abdominal injury. All of these will have a time dependent component, whether it be a neuroanesthetic, ensuring oxygenation, or arresting hemorrhage. Why does extrication matter? Well, it matters because it's one of the few places where we can impact the patient journey to definitive care with this variable on-scene time. For the clinician that attends the RTC to look after that patient, the response time is fixed. They can't change how long it's taken them to get there. Likewise, the transport time to hospital is fixed once they're removed from that vehicle. But what happens between that response time and transfer time is changeable and can be really important if you're bleeding, you've got an obstructive airway, or you're hypoxic. So this means that as those who respond to road traffic collisions, we need to ensure that everything we do on scene is going to add value to that patient's journey. To ascertain whether or not it adds value, well, for that, we need evidence to guide us.
Wow, what an impactful start to the course. I mean, that is really incredible. I know we've talked about this quite a few times, amongst ourselves and on our podcast. And every single time I hear those numbers and the values that are thrown out about the scale of this problem, nationally, wherever we're listening to this and on an international platform, is absolutely remarkable. And I guess, for people who are listening to this course, that therefore inherently means there is an enormous potential to improve practice with that incidence of road traffic collisions going on all the time.
The numbers always absolutely astound me. And you got to, numbers are numbers, aren't they? But when you actually put it into perspective as being real families, real people being torn apart, working age people not being able to go back to work, it all of a sudden has a really personal impact. And I'm sure everyone who's listening to this course has been either personally or professionally affected by it without a shadow of a doubt. It's so ubiquitous, isn't it? It's everywhere.
It has to be. With those numbers, it touches everybody, doesn't it? In some aspect of your life.
But it's like you say, I think the important thing is, like Simon's mentioned and James just did, is it's about that there is an ability to intervene here. There's a point at which we can as professional responders to the post-collision phase, we can reduce morbidity, so these injuries, these disabilities, and mortality. It's just about understanding what are the right things we want to do and making sure that that comes from an evidence base, because it's all well and good being told to do something, but if that's not got an evidence base behind it, then you're just blindly following, aren't you then? And yeah, I think like you, I'm really super excited about the ability to improve patient outcomes.
I think the other thing that people might be surprised by who are listening to this is the number of C-spine injuries and spinal cord injuries. Because again, I think in our minds, we always inflate this to being such a massive problem. And inherently, this is being talked about throughout this course, isn't it? Historically, we've had this idea of this being such a significant problem. It's really put us into stasis around all the other things that we do. And now we're starting to realize, I think, with the evidence base that actually maybe spinal cord problems aren't such a significant issue as we thought.
Absolutely. And, not going to let you jump onto my presentation because I'm going to talk about the evidence in a second.
Sorry, buddy.
So step back in your box, James. But yeah, I think it's this fear that we've always had all along, isn't it? And that's what's held us back from seeking ways to improve patient care. And, if you look at the patient's journey when they arrive in hospital, everything is about time, efficiency. It's about making sure that we're doing the right things. But yet this strange phase between the point of injury and them coming out of the vehicle has been this phase that no one was really sure what we should be doing, because it fell between clinical questions, it fell between engineering questions and things like that, and it's just this space that hasn't really been studied before. But as I'm about to tell you in a few minutes, don't spoil me. That means that it is a really important time period for us to look on.
Well, I mean, you've alluded to it enough so far, Rob. I think it's about time you told us about all of the evidence base that this course is built on. Go on.
I shall do that.